World War II. America's turning point was not defined by a single day, but rather by a chain of pivotal events between 1941 and 1943 that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the war and cemented the United States' role as the decisive force in the global struggle against fascism. Before the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. had maintained a policy of neutrality, scarred by the memories of World War I and reluctant to commit to another overseas conflict. Yet President Franklin D. Roosevelt, recognizing the threat posed by Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan, carefully maneuvered the nation into supporting the Allies through measures like the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, which sent billions of dollars worth of weapons, food, and supplies to Britain, China, and later the Soviet Union, even as isolationist voices in Congress warned against getting dragged into Europe's war. This fragile balance shattered on December 7, 1941, when Japan launched a surprise aerial attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, sinking or damaging 8 battleships, destroying hundreds of aircraft, and killing more than 2,400 Americans, an act that unified the country overnight in outrage and resolve, prompting Congress to declare war on Japan the very next day, with Germany and Italy responding by declaring war on the United States, drawing the nation into both the Pacific and European theaters at once. What followed was one of the most rapid and complete mobilizations in history as the U.S. transformed its peacetime economy into a wartime production powerhouse, converting automobile factories to produce tanks, shipyards to build destroyers, and aircraft carriers and assembly lines to churn out fighter planes, bombers, and rifles, producing so much materiel that American output soon exceeded that of all the Axis powers combined. And this industrial surge was matched by a massive enlistment drive, with millions of men drafted into the Army, Navy, Marines, and Army Air Forces, while millions of women joined the workforce in factories, offices, and military support roles, symbolized by the now iconic figure of Rosie the Riveter. The early months of America's active involvement were marked by painful losses, including the fall of the Philippines in 1942 and the Bataan Death March. But the tide began to turn in June 1942 at the Battle of Midway, a naval engagement in which U.S. codebreakers, having cracked Japanese communication codes, enabled Admiral Chester Nimitz's forces to set an ambush that sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and a heavy cruiser, crippling Japan's offensive capabilities and shifting the strategic momentum in the Pacific. This was followed by the grueling, months-long Battle of Guadalcanal from August 1942 to February 1943, America's first major offensive in the Pacific, where the U.S. Marines, supported by naval and air power, repelled repeated Japanese counterattacks, proving that Japan could be stopped and reversed. While these victories were unfolding in the Pacific, the U.S. was also making its presence felt in the European and North African theaters, joining British forces in Operation Torch in November 1942, a large-scale amphibious invasion of Vichy, French-controlled North Africa, which succeeded in pushing Axis forces under General Erwin Rommel into retreat, marking the first major American-led operation in the European theater. By 1943, American industrial output was overwhelming, supplying not just U.S. forces but also equipping Allied armies across the globe, from Soviet troops on the Eastern Front to British forces in the Mediterranean. Politically, Roosevelt and his military chiefs worked closely with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to plan long-term strategy, leading to agreements at conferences like Casablanca in January 1943, where the Allies declared they would accept nothing less than unconditional surrender from the Axis powers and mapped out the invasion of Italy and the eventual cross-channel invasion of France. At home, the American public endured rationing, war bond drives, and constant news of casualties, but morale remained high due to a shared belief that the war effort was both necessary and just. The period from Midway to late 1943 became the hinge on which the entire war turned. Japan was pushed into a defensive posture, Germany began losing ground in both East and West, and the Allies, with American leadership, resources, and manpower, at the core, moved from survival and containment to full-scale counteroffensive. This shift in momentum was not just military but psychological, as the United States proved it could fight and win on multiple fronts, building the confidence that would carry the Allies through the brutal campaigns still to come, from the island-hopping strategy in the Pacific to the liberation of Europe, ultimately ensuring that by 1945 the Axis powers would face inevitable defeat, and America would emerge not only victorious, but as the dominant political, military, and economic force in the post-war world.